Good people of a great nation, I welcome you to the discussion segment of Development Focus with Jide Ojo, coming to you live on Independent Television, Abuja. This morning, my first segment will be looking at the nexus between corruption and insecurity in Nigeria. Many a time people have said there have been allusion to the fact that insecurity has become an honeypot for some segments of the Nigerian security sector, that they don't even want the insurgency and insecurity to end. A book has been published, edited by two people, one of which is my guest this morning, and is no other than Dr. Chris Waja. Chris Waja, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigerians.
Chris Waja, for your information, is a researcher, is a lecturer, is a consultant, and he was a former commissioner during the tenure of Governor Jonah Jang in Plateau State. He was a commissioner for local government and chieftaincy affairs. Before then, he was an aide to the governor, special advisor to the governor, and then was elevated to becoming the commissioner for local government and chieftaincy affairs. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Jide.
Now, tell us a bit more about yourself. I want you to, maybe I missed out something on your very rich profile. I know you are a researcher, you are a consultant, you are a development expert. You have your roots in civil society before you went to join the academia. What's more for our viewers to know about you?
Just to say, I was Director General Research and Planning in the Governor's Office, not a special advisor.
Okay.
Though that position also does advisory role. But I think the most important for now is that I currently teach, and I'm a researcher also with the Center for Peace and Security Studies, Modi Badma University of Technology in Yola, Adamawa State. I currently represent Africa on the UN Working Group on Mercenaries, looking at the manifestations and activities of mercenaries across the world. And unfortunately, Nigeria tends to be one of the key area of focus for us in the world today, looking at the transnational nature of the activities of organized criminal groups in the country, both within the Sahel, the Lake Chad, as well as down to North Africa. Because when you look at the map of Africa, you see the proximity and the continuity between Nigeria and many of these countries we can call zones of insecurity and instability. It makes Nigeria one of the most vulnerable areas of focus, and there are key reasons for that. The first is the nature of our borders, not well policed. The second is that Nigeria tends to have the population in terms of people that can easily be mobilized and recruited to join mercenary activities, as well as other groups that are holding the West African region siege. And it calls for more serious attention on the part of our policymakers and our security agencies. And all these have been well documented, both in terms of the work we do from the angle of the UN, as well as the work we do both as civil society and the academia. And you recall what the president said at some time ago, that the whole question of availability of arms in the country can be linked not just to local manufacturers and activities of criminal groups locally, but that the fall of Gaddafi in Libya contributed immensely to the spread and flow of not just arms, but also criminals. Because the question we are yet to answer is, when Gaddafi fell and people left Libya, where did they go to? Who tracked them? How many of such individuals have we tracked and profiled? They are back to the country, they are back to the region, they are all over, and we don't know what they are doing. Now, they were sustained by Gaddafi to handle such matters for him. Now, they are readily available for people out there and countries to be used, which takes us back to this, even the book we wrote about how insecurity is being sustained by corruption. And I think that's the reason why I know you invited me here to share.
I did, but again, let's look at this angle of you talked about mercenary, your work with the United Nations as one of the think tank on this issue of mercenaries and all of that. The governor of Borno State, in the recent past, I know you use you mercenary in the context of armed groups fighting against the constituted authority. But mercenaries in the sense of Professor Zulu was to use to get what they call private military contractors, that also popularly called mercenaries, to help in the fight against insurgency. What's your take on that?
Yeah, let me take you back a bit. In 1977, the Organization of African Unity convened a meeting, and one of the key conclusions in that meeting was that mercenary is a major issue in this continent. It must be outlawed. And for the first time in the history of the world, Africa led that push for a mercenary convention to be put in place, and the convention is still active. But the operationalization of that convention is still what is becoming an issue for the continent. Secondly, there is a very thin line also between the loosely framed mercenaries we talk about and the present day organized corporate actors that are involved in military and security related security provisioning and services. And that's what is called the new mercenaries. Today you have private armies. You read this book, Write a Check and Win a War. All you need to do is to just contract them. They go and fight the battle for you. Those are the kind of mercenaries that Professor Zulu was talking about.
Yeah, sure.
Those were the kind of mercenaries that even the Jonathan administration tried to engage.
From South Africa.
South Africa. These are the kind of mercenaries. You have MPRI, you have DINCOP, Blackwater, the former Blackwater.
Okay.
So you have many of them, executive outcome. You have many of them, they are well registered, they are structured, they pay tax, they have people that are readily available, trained. Their deployability and flexibility, as well as adaptability to conflict situation and complex emergency, makes them very ready agencies for stabilization. And that's why many countries resort to using them. Because while you need to deal with the bureaucracy of having to sign off so many processes before you get your troop to be deployed for countries, it takes just 24 hours for these individuals, these groups, to be deployed to the zone of conflict, and you see results. But the question is the backlash of their activities. One, in terms of how they are engaged. Two, in terms of what they do. Three, in terms of accountability and transparency in the context of their engagement, remains one of the key issues that we are dealing with today. But the other group of mercenaries that are not organized, that are available even as individuals for hire, is the one that today is becoming a key issue for us in the context of Nigeria, where you see many young boys either motivated by money or motivated by ideology like politics or religion, going in to fight in countries other than their own based on these motivations. These are the ones that are a bit difficult because they are so mercurial to the extent that you cannot really hold them or lay your hands on the organization or the group to say, okay, these are the individuals we are dealing with. And that's why today you can see what is happening when it comes to banditry. The question is, are all the bandits Nigerians? If they are not Nigerians, Where are they coming from? If they are Nigerians, what is the motivation for even the bandit? Is it just about money? And before now, this whole question of Boko Haram looking for a second front has been an issue. And the Northwest becomes a key fertile ground for them to really go in and then assert their influence and dominance, as well as ensure that the oxygen that they require to sustain the activities in the Northeast is also found in the Northwest. They need money. And banditry is the easiest way for them to get money today, because with the financial intelligence infrastructure that has been put in place, terrorism financing is becoming a key issue, even for big individuals, organizations that support terrorist organizations. They are beginning to see that they are on the searchlight and they are not ready to allow their businesses to crumble. So you can see some level of distance between those, you can say, sponsors of terror, or those, you can say, sponsors of organizations with capacity to undertake terrorist or terrorist-like activities on one hand, and the availability and the openness with which this same terrorist organization can leverage on the weaknesses within communities and within systems to now get available cash directly, either by blackmail for government or they attack communities. For instance, there has been increase in robberies on the roads because they are interested in getting money to sustain themselves.
Okay, so let's come back to you've really expanded the scope of what mercenary actually meant. We have the organized ones, the registered corporations that can deploy, and that's the one that Professor Zulum, the governor of Borno State, is asking Nigeria to look at the possibility of recruiting so that we can end this Boko Haram insurgency once and for all. But you talked about backlash. What are the cost and benefit of hiring the organized mercenaries to deal with the unorganized one? Because now what I have seen, correct me if I'm wrong, is the two categorization of organized mercenary, private military contractors that can help deal with the issue of banditry, insurgency, and all of that. But you have also labeled the insurgents and bandits as also another set of mercenary. Mercurial, unregistered, working either in isolation or as a group, but not registered, not paying tax, not also feasible in true sense. If that two categorizations are what you are painting, then what are the cost and benefit of hiring the organized one to deal with the unorganized one?
Thank you. Interestingly, my PhD thesis was on security sector reform in the context of the broader peace building work, and it was focused on Liberia. I looked at Liberia, and one of the key area I looked at was the privatization of peace building in the context of the involvement of the private sector, that's private military and security companies. Now, presently, the African Union framework on security sector reform abhors the use of private military and security companies in the continent.
Okay.
Which means African governments are not supposed to engage private military and security companies by virtue of that provision. Unfortunately, while that provision is speaking in the way I framed, you see countries that are desperate and they are in their need of help also resorting to the use of these actors. Now, within Africa, in most of the countries where private military and security companies have come in to support governments, it was largely because the government was weak. So if today the private military and security companies will come to Nigeria to do this work, it means we have admitted completely that as a country we are weak, we cannot deal with this internal security challenge with huge implication for our national security as well as regional security for West Africa. So we must admit that. But if we are not admitting that, then we must look inwards in terms of the capabilities we have, in terms of the resources we have to deal with this issue. And the question is it that the Nigerian military is weak and cannot deal with this issue, or we have not been able to put the right individuals and giving them the right equipment and support to deal with this issue? And I go with the second, that I still believe that the Nigerian state has the capacity to effectively deal with insecurity in this country, but to the extent that commitment on the part of the policymakers, commitment on the part of the individuals, the institutions that are supposed to deal with this issue. And let me give you an example. You recall the conflict between the Nigerian Air Force and the Nigerian Army in the last set that left, Buratai and his colleague Sadiq, where they were in the theater of conflict rather than cooperating in adopting a whole of government approach to dealing with insurgency. Each arm was going on was doing it on its own. And we even had a situation where the army had to go and train pilots. Okay, you've trained pilots to go and fight, but you don't have the infrastructure because that is not your job. That is the job of the Nigerian Air Force. And we saw how the Nigerian Air Force and the Nigerian Army each was speaking about its successes in the field rather than the defense headquarters speaking for all. Because where you have joint operations, the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, automatically the command becomes that of the Chief of Defense Staff. So we saw in the last set a very weak Chief of Defense Staff that was unable to assert himself to command our troop in the field, and because he was unable to do that effectively, it became a situation whereby competition rather than cooperation becomes the key issue. It was quite unfortunate that sometimes you even watch on screen situations where Chief of Army Staff was going to brief the President, or Chief of Air Staff was going to brief the President on many of these operations. That responsibility was supposed to be one in which the Chief of Defense Staff was going to brief the President with the team. And
where lies the role of the National Security Advisor?
The National Security Advisor is supposed to be a coordinating office. He's not supposed to be seen talking in public, number one. By virtue of the way that office is framed, your job is to coordinate. Your job is to ensure there is harmony of purpose. Your job is to ensure there is a synchronization of effort in dealing with national security issues. But because of that competition, we saw how the National Security Advisor was on his own and each other arm was on its own. And that joint effort in terms of synergy was not there. The only time you see that happening is when there is a very serious issue and they were all invited to go and meet the President and Commander-in-Chief. That's not how it's supposed to be. When you look at the infrastructure for national security across the world, ours is quite a misnomer, where you see the National Security Advisor even being the spokesperson and being the one openly in public talking. That's not how it's supposed to be. But it's also possible that because of the lacuna you see arising from maybe the inability of people, those charged with the responsibility of dealing with this issue, to do it, then he had to now fill in that gap in the way he's doing.
Okay, so now you have highlighted a number of problems, and I am happy that you dealt with the issue of the backlash and the implications of hiring private military and the security concern.
The one part about that, the backlash, is that, and I give you an example. When DINCOP was invited to Liberia, DINCOP was invited at the instance of the U.S. government. There was a time the parliament in Liberia wrote to DINCOP that they should come and give an account of what they are doing in Liberia, and they wrote back to the parliament to say, we did not sign a contract with the government of Liberia. We signed a contract with the government of America. So whatever you want to get from us, you need to get from them. But we've seen also where even these private military and security companies take advantage of conflict situation. In Sierra Leone, for instance, the government had no money to pay the private military and security company. So they now signed a new round of agreement that, okay, we are going to mine diamond in your country until there is stability. And the stability did not come because of the political economy. So we must then the whole issue of accountability for their own
and
efforts.
that wasn't the blood diamond.
It wasn't good. So we need to be conscious of
because
all
my own take actually is if we have that much money and resources to hire private military and security companies, why don't we channel that kind of resources to boost military operations by our nationals, recruit more, provide technology and all of that?
Unfortunately, it's not possible because we have a system in this country where sanctions don't exist. People don't pay for not taking responsibilities. We had a situation, for instance, where we don't do a post-mortem or audit of leadership. And that's why you can afford to have chief of army staff stay for, chief of army staff, chief of defense staff, chief of air staff, naval staff stay for 5 years, 6 years on the ground. And Nigerians were complaining. Because the point is, even within that context, we've not seen people in command being shown the way out for either negligence or incompetence. Rather, you are retired. They don't see reason why they should resign. In some countries,
they are allegedly retired, and then you compensate them with ambassadorial,
either ambassadorial or many of them go back to become chiefs. Now, with that whole regalia of incompetence for many of our leaders, they go back to take on chieftaincy titles.
And even come to Senate.
Senators, they become governors. So what do you have? A cycle of incompetence. Because the same person people complained about for being a general that did not lead well, for being whatever position that was not done well, he's celebrated as a governor, and you expect him to work. You did not perform any surgery on such individuals to implant new cells into his system or hormones for him to be a different person. And that's why you discover or you see that when it is bad at the executive, it is always bad at the legislature, because they are all one and the same. So until we have a system where the reward system is so strong and the sanction regime is also very strong and visible, that when you don't perform, there are consequences for not performing. And when you perform, there are consequences for performing.
Sorry, Chris, let me pause you there. Accountability in the fight against insecurity, I quite agree with you. But how do you benchmark accountability and performance when nobody knows? I mean, not we in the civil society or maybe in public space knows what were the terms of reference or terms of engagement. What did the president tell them? Or was there a charter of demand that if this position you are holding, we want you to do X, Y, Z within this timeline, as we have when we write proposals in civil society that we want to get grants. You know, there are it comes with budget notes, it comes with work plan, and your work plan indicates at what point in time you will have executed a particular activity and all of that. And if for whatever reason you fail to, you must advance reason, because there are either 6 month quarterly report or biennial report that you have to submit to donors. But in the case of appointing the military chiefs, whether the Inspector General of Police, Chief of Army Staff, Chief of Defense Staff, Chief of Air Staff, Chief of Naval Staff, is there anything, I mean, you are more familiar with their terrain, military operations than me. Is there a charter, or is there a scope of work or terms of reference in engaging them to say, in 1 year, this is what you are benchmarking your performance with, so that if you fail to meet those demands, then you can be sanctioned?
There are. 2 years ago, the House Committee on Army of the National Assembly invited me during their retreat, and my discussion with them.
That's the committee of
Army,
Honorable Ringin.
What's his name?
From Adamawa.
Yes,
from Taraba.
Taraba. So no, that's a different. That apart from him, I'm talking of the 2 years ago. That's when this government came in. That Rima Shawulu. I also participated in one of the meetings with the Rima group. And for the Rima group, my focus with them was on mercenaries. But for this set, the focus was on the army in the context of internal security operations. And one of the points I raised was that when it comes to performance indicators, responsibilities in terms of how people account for performance, all the documents are there.
They are there?
They are there. Now,
but why are they not made public?
Now, the point is...
For the media and civil society to hold them to
the point is, up till now, we are still yet to get a robust civil society engagement with the security sector when it comes to dealing with this issue.
But Clean Foundation is working with them.
Clean Foundation is still not there yet. I've done a lot of work with Clean Foundation. I've done a lot of work with PLAC, and I was commissioned by PLAC to look at what we call the mechanism, to design a mechanism for oversight, both for the National Assembly and civil society. Now, for the National Assembly, the responsibility of the National Assembly is to perform oversight on these institutions. Unfortunately, instead of doing that, many of them become contractors overnight. The same institution you are supposed to perform oversight on are the same you go to and you are either begging for favors. Now, for each favor you beg, your integrity drops. Now, because your integrity drops, your bargaining power over these institutions in terms of oversight and your ability to call them to order becomes either weak or non-existent. And that is why you have a situation where sometimes the National Assembly will summon chief executives of these institutions and they won't come. That's the highest level of disrespect. And nothing happens. We saw and we still see how the National Assembly is unable to even deal with any of these actors or these leaders who head these institutions. Why? It's because either they are afraid of the presidency, and by the presidency, I'm not talking about the president alone. I'm talking about that whole system within the presidency.
Vice president,
yes,
the
either
chief
they are
of
afraid of them,
chief of staff, and the SDM.
Because many of them also are loyal either to party or personal relationships, and they are not ready to put national interest above their own personal interest.
Now, Chris, if you are coming up with this expose, I ask again, where if there are performance indicators and charter of demand on our military chiefs, including the IG of police, where is it domiciled? Is it with the Ministry of Defense or is it with the National Security Advisor? Why is it not made public so that media and civil society can hold them to account and say, this is what you signed on to. When you were appointed, you were supposed to have achieved XYZ within this period.
Number one, the National Assembly is one area.
That is domicile. Yeah,
because these people went for screening.
Okay.
And when you go for screening, you don't just go there to say my name is this and this. There are specific questions, and you go, many of them discuss their vision, and these visions are in black and white. Number two, the Ministry of Defense also that provides the policy guidance for them have specific and clearly defined roles for each of the arms. They are there. When you go to the PAMSEC, Ministry of Defense, that handles many of these issues in terms of the day-to-day running of these institutions, they are there. When you go to the defense headquarters, they are also there, because the Chief of Defense Staff is supposed to ensure coordination of each of these arms. And if it's to ensure coordination, that coordination must be on the basis of a policy that shows where he sits, where each of these arms sits, and where in the spirit of jointness they all sit when it comes to dealing with issues that involves all of them coming together to work. All these documents are supposed to be there. But the problem with our military is this. When you look at other countries, public access to documents is not an issue. In the context of Nigeria, even if a military man is giving you a message to his brother, typing, you will see restricted down. Now, you restrict public information. Information that is generated with public funds is restricted. Everything is classified. So you cannot classify. We must demand, and in the spirit of the Freedom of Information Bill that is already in place, Nigerians must demand for public access to many of these documents. For instance, what is or should be the role of the army in the context of the current war against insurgency in the Northeast? What is supposed to be the focus? Same for the Air Force. In the spirit of the Multinational Joint Task Force, what is the mandate? That document is there.
Okay.
But advocacy on the part of citizens is still something that we must push.
Chris, I want us to talk about the nexus between corruption and insecurity. That's why I primarily brought you. And we have talked, it's not as if we have digressed unnecessarily. But I want you to tie this down. That book, tell us the title. What was the motivation? What was the gist of your findings?
It's titled The Compromised State.
Compromised State, yes.
How corruption fuels insecurity in Nigeria.
Who funded it?
The MacArthur Foundation. And CITAD, the Center for Information Technology and Development in Kano, is the main organization that managed the funding. And myself and YZIA, the executive director, had to do a lot in terms of coordinating the work. The compromised state itself, it's very profound.
Yeah, it is, because when I saw it, a compromised state.
Yeah.
And we have been fighting this insecurity insurgency for over a decade.
And that is why the compromise comes in.
Yes.
Because you shouldn't be fighting insurgency, and Nigerians should not be complaining about insecurity and corruption for a decade.
And it's like it's been democratized now from northeast to northwest to north central to south south.
That's why, that's the logic with compromised states. It means the state has been.
So what are your findings?
Now, before I talk about the findings, I want to provide a context to this discussion. Nigeria, as a country, sits on three key pillars. the governance pillar, the security pillar, and the development pillar.
Governance, security, and development.
The primary reason of the state, that's from the angle of governance, is to provide for the security and welfare of its citizens. Now, when you are providing for the security and the welfare of your citizens, it means you are dealing with security and development together. So this three pillar becomes very important in helping us understand the connection in the context of what is expected of the state. Now, the state is in crisis, confronted with a security dilemma, and that security dilemma is framed on the logic of a lacuna that exists, and that lacuna is one that is framed around multiple explanations in terms of not just the causalities of conflict, which is known, but about the nature of response to conflict. And that explanation of the nature of response to conflict is one in which the dominant argument is that while the state is responding to conflict, it is important for us to understand that there is a political economy of conflict that is framed around resource allocation. And that the resource allocation in the context of how allocatable resources to dealing with insecurity is managed by state institutions charged primarily with the responsibility of dealing with insecurity in the context of how monies should be used to deal with them. And what we've seen is that insecurity continues, insecurity is sustained as a result of sharp practices that takes place within that continuum of state response to insecurity. Budgets are made, monies are allocated, and we tried as much as possible to document many of the cases that we saw. One, for instance, the Dasuki Gate issue, which is
the $2.1 billion
good, was documented
in 2015.
Good. We tried to document where those monies, how the monies were shared, and we documented explaining also what the money would have been used for if at all they were properly used. The Babachir matter of cutting grass with almost 250 million naira was documented. The committee that was set up by the president to look into many of those issues around the Bade issue and several other actors that were involved in many of these resource corruption, insecurity matter were also captured. The growing role of security votes in either sustaining insecurity or even fueling them was also captured, where today security vote has become the easiest way for executives to channel resources, and that the absence of accountability in the context of security votes that are often called classified becomes one of the biggest and easiest way for state officials to really undermine systems, and that is also an area that was captured. Now, in the context of the Northeast, specifically around IDPs, how relief materials that are supposed to be given to citizens are also channeled into different sources, and many of them disappear. and the everyday experiences of displaced persons in camps, of not being given what government says has been given to them, were also captured. The role of the media in terms of how the media contributes to this conversation and how media narratives around corruption and conflict plays out was also captured. And for us, some of the key conclusions around what the book talked about was, one, that the weakness associated with accountability of government officials and institutions remained a major issue that need to be addressed, and that if it is not addressed, then corruption will continue. And we've not seen elements of that in the context of how the conflict situation right now is going. You recall how governors came out to say they've spent this and this amount of money in fighting, in either in negotiating with bandits. The question is, was that money budgeted for? How did you get the money? So who is asking that question? Our very good friend, the former governor of Borno, Governor Shetima, said Borno state government spent 10 billion to fight insecurity, insurgency in the northeast.
Down in 8 years.
Yes.
10 billion.
10 billion. Nobody said anything about that. 10 billion for insurgency. So, and many of these governors spent huge amount of money on that. But the question is, what if state governors are spending this kind of money and the federal government has appropriated monies for such issues? So what happens? So you see this one problem, two levels of government all providing monies for them. We see increasingly instances where state governments are today taking on responsibilities for maintaining federal security institutions.
Like police and
police, yeah, it's a misnomer.
Yeah, it is.
And that on its own, in the context of saying they are helping them, is pure corruption.
Okay, now I know because of time constraints, we possibly will have you back some time. You have articulated a number of things. Let me pick your brain on quite a number of others. Kidnapping has become an industry all over Nigeria. How do you think we can break the back of this? Because is it part of the corruption, fueling insecurity, or what? Are these abduction, particularly of school children and all of that we are witnessing, how do you think we can have it ended?
When insecurity thrives, it means there is a vacuum. And the vacuum can be either because of the absence of government, where many of these communities are just on their own, fending for themselves, now relying on their own self-help measures for security, or the state is there but doing nothing about the crisis that these people are passing through. But for me, the point is, I've listened to interesting videos on social media where some of these bandits will say some government officials or some security agencies know, or agents, not or agencies, agents know about us. And we saw what happened with the Gumi saga. The same Nigerian security that was unable to locate bandits despite the Air Force and the Army coming together. A Gumi private citizen in Kaduna located bandits in Zamfara, located bandits in Niger. It's quite unfortunate. It means something.
Did they actually say they couldn't locate them, or
but regardless of what?
They didn't want to use maximum force so that they don't have casualty of the victim.
Regardless of what, in the eyes of the victim, in the eyes of the communities, they see that as inability of the government to locate. And you shouldn't wait for a Gumi to do that before you say you were not ready to use maximum force.
Okay,
because
so
communication with citizens is very important. Now, the point I'm making is that the Nigerian state must reassert its powers over two things. One, over its sole control of the instrument of coercion, because it's when bandits have access to weapons that insecurity thrives. Number two is that it must demonstrate commitment towards ensuring that it protects every citizen. What we are seeing today was not there 20 years ago. So what happened 20 years ago?
So what can we gain from technological infusion in the fight against insecurity?
Technology is a major lever for that. It's a major enabler. Look at what's happening to drones. With drones, you can survey, you can plant surveillance equipment. You can undertake surveillance of the country, and you can effectively do that because you have police commands, DSS commands, army commands across all our states. So if you have them and you have boots on the ground in those states, it makes your work easy. The second point is that we are still not effectively maximizing this whole notion of citizen-centered policing and intelligence.
Community policing, you mean?
Not just community policing in terms of that interaction, but the communities remain the primary providers of intelligence. And I've argued that we need to dismantle police barracks and let the police be part of the citizens. Police barracks were colonial creation. They were established by the colonial government to separate the police from the other citizens. Because
but we also have military barracks now.
Yeah, but by military barracks you understand because of the nature of the military. But the police is supposed to be the most civil institution in this country, the nearest to the people. Where you have the police as my neighbor, and I can easily run to him. And I ask a very simple question. What will be the response time for an average policeman in the case of insecurity anywhere in this country?
Okay, Chris, that's where we have to pause you. Our time is up, and I look forward to hosting you, because issue of security is not something that we'll have one discussion and we think we have to offer solutions. We have not talked about piracy, the issue of the border, porosity of our borders, and quite a number of issues. We have military deployment in 32 out of 36 states. Is this also not an aberration? Are we pandering to the military at the expense of the police? These are questions for another day, but I want to thank you immensely for squeezing time. I know I have to practically arrest you and coerce you to be on this show this morning, and I really thank you for the honor you've done me in coming to share perspective and your wealth of experience on the nexus between corruption and insecurity, issues around military contractors, and other issues about community policing. I do hope if I call you some other time, you will oblige me.
Always.
I wish you best of luck in your engagement in Abuja, and safe journey when you go back to your base. Thank you very much. Distinguished viewers, that's where we drop the anchor on the first segment of Development Focus with Jidojo this morning. Please do stay tuned as we have another segment, discussion segment, coming up in a short while. Thank you.